My name is Nico, and I work at TTCriders, which is a public transit advocacy organization. Um, by way of description, I am a white person with short brown hair and glasses. Today I'm wearing a black shirt. And I want to welcome everyone to our first Wheel-Trans workshop, Wheel-Trans and Family of Services 101. This is the first of two workshops that we'll be doing on Wheel-Trans. So today we'll be talking about eligibility, the application process, how to challenge the eligibility category that you've been assigned, and other kinds of Wheel-Trans issues. And next Wednesday at 1 p.m., we'll have a second workshop where we will be talking about what your rights are on Wheel-Trans and what you can expect during each Wheel-Trans trip that you take. So if you want to sign up for that Wheel-Trans workshop, you can do so at the same registration link that you used to sign up for this workshop. Next slide. So before we start, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the land. We are all joining virtually, so we might be on different treaty lands, but all three of the presenting organizations, so that's TTCriders, Center for Independent Living Toronto, and Arch Disability Law Center, we're all located in Toronto. Um, and Toronto is part of the Dish with One Spoon territory. This is a territory between the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas that bound them to share the territory and to protect the land. The dish symbolizes the land we live on and benefit from. The single spoon symbolizes caring for the land so that there is enough for all. Um, CILT, TTCriders, and Arch Disability Law Center all acknowledge our responsibility to work towards a more equitable and inclusive Toronto for all, especially those who experience multiple forms of intersecting oppression, like disabled, Indigenous, Black, and other racialized people. So advocating for a better Wheel-Trans system is part of that work. Next slide. Thank you. I'll just go over a few session guidelines before we start. So we do have access supports today. So that's ASL English interpretation and CART captioning. Today's workshop is meant to empower you with information and resources. For privacy and time management, please stay muted if you aren't speaking. We're also asking that you turn off your video to preserve bandwidth, except for the hosts who are speaking and the ASL interpreters until the question and answer section, which will be at the end. Yeah, and oh, sorry. If you could just go back to the previous slide. So yeah, please hold your questions until the Q&A section. And at that point, if you'd like to ask a question, you can use the raise hand function, or you can type your question into the chat box and we'll see it that way. We're also recording the meeting today, but we'll stop recording during the question and answer section so you can ask your question without being recorded. If you need tech support, you can select Dev Ramsewak in the chat box. You can send them a direct message and they will help you. We also know that talking about Wheel-Trans can activate all kinds of emotions. And if you're needing some peer support, you can feel free to send a message directly to Robin Simmons in the chat box, and they will be able to assist you. And if you need to take breaks or to get up and move around, please feel free to do that. And above all, we want to co-create a space where everyone will feel heard and respected, and we're committed to ensuring a safe space for all. I also want to offer a small disclaimer before we begin, which is that this presentation is for information purposes only, and the information that we'll be presenting is current as of today, which is April 22nd, 2026. The information given is subject to change depending on possible policy, regulation, and law changes in Ontario. For the most current information, participants should check the websites and resources mentioned in this presentation. Uh, the information provided is also not legal advice. So we recommend consulting a lawyer if you need legal advice on a specific issue. Next slide. And this is our agenda for today. So we'll be doing an introduction. So you'll hear from each of the speakers for today. Then we'll open it up to the audience to hear a bit about the questions that you have today and the experiences that you've had using Wheel-Trans. Then we will start presenting the information. So it'll be on Wheel-Trans and Family of Services, and how to apply for Wheel-Trans and appeal your conditional status. And then we'll have a Q&A at the end. I'll pass it over to Adam.
TTCriders is a transit advocacy organization. Its membership-based and volunteer-led. I am a co-chair of the Accessibility Committee, and we advocate for accessible, affordable, and dignified public transit that connect all of Toronto and its neighborhood and helps connect people to other parts of the GTA. I forget who I'm sending it over to.
You're sending it over to me,
All
Adam.
right, take it on, John.
Hi, everyone. My name is John Massa. I am the Independent Living Skills Coordinator at the Center for Independent Living in Toronto. I use the pronouns he, him. I'm a white, cisgender, disabled male who uses Wheel-Trans. A visual description, I have short black hair and I'm wearing a black t-shirt. A little bit about CILT. CILT is deeply rooted in the independent living philosophy, and then nothing about us without us disability rights movement, which is the model used by the United Nations. We have a number of programs at CILT. We have information on a referral and a volunteer program. We have peer support and parenting with disability network. My program is independent living skills training, which is helping people with self-advocacy. And we also have the Attendant Service Application Center, ASAC for short, and the direct funding program. We just completed a project called IDEA, and we also have a number of community partners that have come together for the GTA Disability Coalition. I want to thank Keith Welsh, a former colleague at CILT, and Deb Ramsawak for their contributions to this workshop. And I'll pass it on to Gabriel from Arch.
Hi, so my name is Gabriel Resnick. I am my pronouns are he, him. I'm a white cisgendered male. I am wearing I have brown hair and I'm wearing a brown sweater. So I'm a staff lawyer at Arch Disability Law Center. Arch is a disability rights legal clinic. We represent persons with disabilities as well as organizations of persons with disabilities and often families of persons with disabilities. Arch is dedicated to defending and advancing the equality rights, entitlement, and fundamental freedoms striving for the inclusion of low-income persons with disabilities across Ontario.
So it's back to me, and so we would like to hear from you. As an icebreaker, please share in the Zoom chat if you or someone you know uses Wheel-Trans and or the family of service, and what has been your experience, and what are you hoping to learn today. We're looking for your feedback so that we can address some of your issues and even your questions during the Q&A. So you can put your comments in the chat, and we'll get to them during the Q&A. And I'll pass it back to Adam. You're on mute, Adam.
Yes. Okay. Wheel-Trans and family of services 101. On this picture, we see somebody loading onto a Wheel-Trans vehicle. Next slide. Wheel-Trans is the TTC's paratransit program that provides accessible shared ride public transit services to people with disabilities that make riding conventional transit difficult or impossible. You do not have to have a formal diagnosis to be eligible, but you do have to have functional limitations that limit your ability to use conventional transit. You might also be using Wheel-Trans if you find yourself canceling plans because of dread of taking the TTC. You need a seat and sometimes don't get it. Weather makes TTC unusable with your mobility aid, and you are frequently using taxis, and the costs are unaffordable. Next slide. Applying for Wheel-Trans.
So I'll take it from
Yeah,
here.
yes.
And
Yeah. Thanks.
so in this picture we have here an image of the front of a white and red Wheel-Trans ProMaster bus that is parked in the TTC parking lot. The bus is empty with no passengers or drivers. So we'll go on to the next slide. So applying for Wheel-Trans, for new people applying for Wheel-Trans, or even people who are asked to reapply if they've been on the service, you need to go and fill out the application form by going to www.ttc.ca/Wheel-Trans or call 416-393-4111 to request a copy of the application by mail. The application has two main parts. The first part is filled out by the customer or the person with a disability. And the second part is filled out by the customer's healthcare provider. It is recommended that you get your healthcare provider to include information why it is unsafe for you to take conventional transit. And if you're re-registering or submitting an appeal, it's important that you make sure you get a new note from your healthcare provider with updated information. So depending on your application, you may be asked to go for an in-person interview, what is known as a functional assessment test. As part of the initial application, you have to do this in-person interview with an occupational therapist, where they may ask you to do some physical tests like walking across a room or climbing stairs. We'll go on to the next slide. So the application process is once you have filled out your application, you send it to Wheel-Trans either by mailing it or by sending it by email. A TTC customer abilities liaison person reviews your application, and if necessary, you may be asked, as I mentioned, to do a functional assessment test by an occupational therapist. Once your application is reviewed, you may be assigned a category out of the three. The first is unconditional, which means that you have a disability that always prevents you from using the TTC conventional service, which are subways, streetcar, buses, and you will require Wheel-Trans door-to-door service. The second category is conditional service, means that you have a disability that limits your ability to consistently use TTC conventional transit. You may be able to use conventional transit for all or part of your trip, but you may also qualify for Wheel-Trans door-to-door service under specific conditions. For example, bad weather or traveling to a non-accessible location. The third category is temporary service, which means that you have temporary disability that prevents you from using conventional TT service, and you require Wheel-Trans for all or part of your trip for a defined period of time. So, for example, if you have an injury or had surgery or are not able to use conventional service, you'll be able to have this temporary service status. We'll go on to the next slide. What's important about some important tips about your application form is do not downplay your disability. If you have multiple disabilities, list them all. If you have mental health, cognitive, sensory, or physical disabilities, it's important to have a complete picture of your disability. You can also ask for accommodations to fill out your form, and you could bring a support person for any in-person interviews for this functional test assessment. We'll go on to the next slide. So what we have here is a sample of the application on the right, and it talks about how to mention your disabilities that are preventing you from taking bus, subway, or streetcar, the conventional TTC system. And then it also gives you space why the conventional transit is unsafe for you. And it's important that you use your worst day possible regarding your disability. So the screenshot here shows the digital Wheel-Trans application form, and it shows a question that reads, please identify any disability conditions that affect your ability to travel on conventional transit. We'll go on to the next slide. If you need support in filling out your application, CILT and TTCriders can support you in filling out your application forms. If you're interested in one-to-one peer support, please contact CILT or TTCriders. To contact CILT, please email us at cilt@cilt.ca. And to contact TTCriders, please email at info@ttcriders.ca. Next slide. So if you're asked to go to an in-person assessment with an occupational therapist, what you'll be asked to do is you may be, depending on your disability listed in your application, you may be asked to walk a specific distance, navigate stairs, or talk about weather sensitivity. All these assessments are held indoors. This is a very different environment than using the TTC, as we know. So please keep this in mind when you're doing your assessment, and make sure you talk to the occupational therapist and staff there about navigating the real TTC environment and how it can be challenging. Next slide. So other very important tips for an in-person assessment. Please bring your cane, walker, or other mobility device, and imagine it's your worst day. Use your worst day as your everyday. It's really important. It's also suggested that if you use both a power mobility device and a manual mobility device, it's recommended that you bring your manual mobility device for the assessment. This is because the TTC are trying to push persons who use power mobility devices off of Wheel-Trans and for you to use the conventional service. Another very important thing is if you're asked for an in-person assessment, that you should ask for a door-to-door Wheel-Trans trip to get to the assessment. If you don't, they'll ask you, how did you get here? If you say use conventional transit, that is part of your application that they'll note and say that, hey, you can use conventional transit. So it's important that you request the TTC Wheel-Trans that they send a Wheel-Trans bus to bring you to an interview. You can also bring a support person with you, which is very important. Next slide. So once again, understanding the decision after your application has been received. If you do not require a functional test assessment, on the TTC website, it says they take up to 14 days to make a decision once you submit your application, but it will take longer if you have to do an in-person functional assessment. After that, you'll receive a decision of either unconditional, temporary, or conditional. So just to reiterate, unconditional is that you have a disability that prevents you from using conventional transit, TTC, and you will have full access to Wheel-Trans door-to-door trips. Temporary, you have a temporary disability that prevents you, sorry.
I don't know what happened there. Give me one moment.
Oh, there we go.
All right.
There we are. Okay. So back to temporary. So if you have a decision saying that you are categorized as temporary, your temporary disability prevents you from using conventional TTC, and you can access TTC, Wheel-Trans for a limited amount of time until your disability is no longer temporary. And finally, unconditional, or also known as family of service. You have a disability that prevents you from using conventional transit when a specific condition is present. And I'll mention these conditions in the next slide, but such as bad weather or during rush hour. Otherwise, you will likely end up having to use the family of service integrated model, which is a combination of Wheel-Trans vehicles and the regular TTC service. And Adam will be talking about that a little bit later. Next slide. So some of the conditions, if you receive a conditional eligibility, you will receive a full door-to-door trip with Wheel-Trans when your condition is present. For example, if you have a disability that fluctuates or an episodic disability and you're having a bad day, you're able to use the full service of Wheel-Trans. If you have problems with traveling in darkness, low vision, you're able to use the full service of Wheel-Trans. Or if you're traveling in significantly bad weather, winter or extreme heat, during rush hour or traveling alone, you will be able to access full door-to-door trip using Wheel-Trans. Next slide. So right now we have a break for about 10 minutes or so. And when we return, Adam will be talking about the family of service, and then Gabriel will be talking about how to appeal a decision, and then we'll have resources at the end. So we'll come back at 1:40. We'll just take 10 minutes.
So the family of services program that is part of Wheel-Trans, users must use a conventional TTC service for part or all of the journey. This means that riders must use accessible buses, low-floor streetcars, subways, or use accessible stations in addition to Wheel-Trans. The shift is due to cost cuts and more people relying on Wheel-Trans, but the TTC is facing funding shortfalls. Family of services is a cheaper way of providing quote unquote accessible transit, but at what cost? Next slide. So what you're seeing here is an example of a door-to-door trip of somebody going from home to Vibrant Healthcare Alliance or another community setting. And this ride would only be about 40 to 70 minutes long compared to, on the next slide, we're going to show you that same trip, what it might look like on family of services. Next slide. And you will see that the ride is a lot longer, and they would go from Vibrant Healthcare Alliance to Eglinton Station. They would take the subway to York Mills Station. They would then be told to get on a bus and go to York Mills Road and Old York Mills. And then a Wheel-Trans vehicle would pick them up at Don Mills Road and then take them home. And this ride could be about 75 to 85 minutes. So it would probably at least double the time of the trip. Next slide. The family of services trip is not yet mandatory. The DTCs that they would probably speak more to the community before they made it mandatory. And if you're booking online, you should be able to go change from family of services to door. But again, they don't make it easy, and some people say that the link is tiny or small and isn't always in the most convenient spot. But that is said to be a way that you can book a door-to-door trip, even if you are categorized as conditional. Uh, Next slide. And here it shows an example of how it looks on the sample screen. We again it is said to be there. But we would like to hear from the community if they're having issues with this. Next slide. Okay, on the access hubs, they are just like fancy bus shelters,
Visually,
but they but they are fully they are more sealed, so you should be able to be sheltered from the conditions and whatnot, even though I've heard some people complain that they are already leaking. They can accommodate several customers, and they are supposed to get the top priority for snow and other removal services. Next slide. And these are an example of all the places where they are. These, and there's a few pages of this where again aren't gonna go through all of them, but this is just an example of some of them. Next slide. This is just more of the same. Um, next slide. And another thing is there are some areas where there are shared wheel-trans stops, where there are bus stops where wheel-trans will also drop off, and you can see that there's a section for taking no shows and whatnot on the board and stuff, and these are usually wider bus stops and easy access for them, and then the idea would be you would just wait for on the bus to show up, and these are sometimes used on the more frequent routes. So the wait shouldn't be too long. But again, we'd like to hear feedback. Up here now, I don't know who. Yeah.
Gabriel will be doing the appeal for eligibility criteria. Just to make sure, Gabe, I know the volume was a little bit low on your mic.
Yeah, I switched microphones.
It's
Is
much
that okay?
better. Yeah.
So, so I'm going to be talking about appealing your eligibility categories, and we'll go to the next slide. So, as explained earlier, once you're assessed into one of three different categories. Those are unconditional, conditional, and temporary. If you disagree with whatever category you were found to be, you can appeal. You have the right to appeal that finding, and the process of appealing is that you have to submit an appeal to the TTC, and you must do so within 90 days of receipt of your eligibility decision. I'm going to go to the next slide. So, in order to get the appeal form, you can get one online, but you could also request a copy from the TTC. Often, as part of the appeal process, you'll have to do something called the functional assessment test. And a functional assessment test is done by an occupational therapist, and its role is to figure out whether you have the ability to ride on conventional transportation. And it's important to understand that when they're making these initial assessments, their focus is on whether or not you can ride conventional transit rather than whether or not you require unconditional transit. So the mindset to begin with is that everyone can use conventional transit, and you would have to demonstrate that you're not able to use conventional transit. And as part of the appeal, your eligibility can change after the functional assessment. So the third piece that's not mentioned on this slide is an actual appeal before a panel, but the Wheel-Trans can make the decision to uh, Wheel-Trans can make the decision to overturn your eligibility, like to change the eligibility at the functional assessment test stage. Uh, Next slide. So, in preparing for your functional assessment, it's important that um, ahead of time, think of potential questions and answers to questions that you might expect. And we'll have the next slide, we'll have some questions, but just to, really when you're going into it, another thing we do recommend also is, if possible, like bringing all available medical documentation. Sometimes you may want to get a new medical letter if you can, to explain exactly why you're not able to travel on conventional transportation. Next slide. So on this slide, there's a number of different questions. I'm not going to go through all of them, but uh, as outlined, the main focus is on whether or not you can use conventional transit. So one of the questions we know is always asked is, have you used conventional transit within the past number of years? Have you tried to use the family of services? So you have, you have to remember that this functional assessment is often done after you're appealing it. So you'll have had time between getting the initial decision and doing the functional assessment. And so the question is whether or not you've attempted to use this family of services model. Uh, you may also be asked specific questions about your disability, and your ability to do activities of daily living, such as, can you have a shower by yourself? Um, do you need assistance? They also may ask questions about your mobility device, such as how long, your wheelchair battery lasts, whether your walker can be folded up and, put away. Questions like that, just so they understand, you know, both about your abilities, but also about, the assistance you may be using while riding on transit. Right, next slide. So as outlined, so the First step is to appeal. The second step is often the functional assessment. And the third step now is the appeal hearing. So if after the functional assessment, the occupational therapist confirms the initial decision, so after you apply, you get your initial, decision of whether you're unconditional, conditional, or temporary, and after the functional assessment, they then decide whether or not to change that assessment or change that category. If they keep the same category, so if you're conditional originally and then you do the functional assessment, then you're conditional again, you then can go to an appeal hearing to argue that the eligibility category decision was incorrect. So at the appeal, it's a three-panel members. One of those members is a TTC employee. Another one is an occupational therapist. And then the last is a member of the advisor committee on accessible transit, which are made up of persons with disabilities who use accessible transportation in Toronto. So so someone who knows about accessible transit from a disability perspective, someone who knows about the TTC, and then someone who has the clinical expertise to know about uh, the functional assessment, and they're there mostly to interpret the functional assessment test results. So if anything comes up about the functional assessment, they can speak to that. Next slide. So to prepare for your appeal, you should ahead of time prepare speaking notes highlighting what you want to say. And again, the really important part is to focus on how your disability prevents you from being able to use conventional transportation. Depending on the functional assessment and what happens, you may also want to argue that the functional assessment did not properly assess your disabilities and your ability to ride on conventional transit. For example, the assessment, at least this is what it was like about a year or two ago, was to go from point A to point B in a room. And for someone with a mobility device, they're able to go from point A to point B in a room, but there's a number of other factors that are not taken into consideration. For example, it's in an empty room. There's no traffic. Like there's not many people there. You don't have to get over gaps between the platform and the subway car. Um, a lot of what a lot of the barriers people face with mobility devices are not taken into consideration during the functional assessment test, which is, why you may want to highlight some of the concerns you had with the functional assessment test. At the appeal, you can have a support person or a representative with you at the hearing. You could also bring a medical practitioner. I've seen that before where someone brings their doctor to speak about, why they personally feel that the individual cannot ride conventional transportation. Um, Even if you have a legal representative with you, you shouldn't rely on that because in my experience of hearings I've went to, the person with the disability is the one that has to answer the questions. So it's about their abilities. And yes, a lawyer can, say, well, my client has, these limitations. It really is important that the person with the disability is the one outlining why they cannot ride conventional transportation. Next slide. So, due to the the creation of the of the new eligibility categories came from uh, the Accessibility of Ontarians with Disabilities Act, which is commonly referred to as the AODA. So this act created, and specifically a regulation under this act, created these three categories and also outlined the ability for transportation companies like the TTC to have an integrated model such as the family of services model. In addition, this regulation outlined that conventional transportation should be fully accessible. So TTC's perspective is that the system is fully accessible and therefore people or less people required to use Wheel-Trans service because the conventional transportation service is much more accessible than it was before. However, we know that the TTC is still not accessible, whether that be because of not enough elevators, um, it always being quite busy, uh, routes not, people having to go to a significant distance to get to their closest bus stop. All of these things are factors when it comes to accessing transportation. After you get the decision of the appeal decision, so if the appeal panel agrees with the decision, the initial decision that was made, technically that is the final decision. There's no other appeal routes within the TTC. The only way to argue against that decision is to file something called a judicial review, where you would be going to court to outline or to argue that the decision was unreasonable. This is quite difficult to do, and if you are considering option, we do recommend that you reach out to Arts Law Center to talk about that option because it can be quite challenging and it's very much a legal process. Next slide. So,
We'll go back, and I
yeah.
think we'll pass it on to Nico. Thank you, Gabriel.
We can go to the next slide. Uh, and thank you to all of the speakers for sharing all of that information. We will have a dedicated question and answer period at the end. I just have a few resources that I'd like to share before we get into that. The first is a report from TTCriders. A few years ago, we held a town hall with Wheel-Trans users to discuss the changes to Wheel-Trans and the family of service model. And after that town hall, we used the information and feedback that we heard to create a report that goes over a lot of the information that we talked about today, as well as personal stories from Wheel-Trans users about their experience using Wheel-Trans. You can find this report by going to ttcriders.ca/Wheel-Trans-report. And that's on our website for download. Next slide. And if you'd like to get involved in advocating for better Wheel-Trans and a more accessible TTC, you can get involved with TTCriders Accessibility Committee. by visiting the link ttcriders.ca/volunteer, or by sending us an email at info@ttcriders.ca. You can also get involved with CILT by joining their monthly Peer Connect. There's a link here to join Peer Connect. You can also join their mailing list to attend workshops like this one throughout the year. And you can join that mailing list by emailing cilt@cilt.ca. And you can also follow CILT on social media, um, uh, including X, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And the handles are there on the slide, but I'll read them out as well. So on X, it's at CIL_Toronto. Facebook is CILT Toronto. Instagram, CIL Toronto. And YouTube is CIL_Toronto. Next slide. And I think this was mentioned in the chat, but we will be sending out a PDF of these slides so that you can review on your own time. We'll also send out a video link to this presentation, as well as a evaluation survey that you can fill out to help us understand what you liked about this workshop and what you thought could be improved for next time. Next slide. And here is the contact information for all three of the presenting organizations. So for TTC Writers, you can contact us by phone at 416-309-9026. And you can email us at info@ttcriders.ca. For CILT, you can call 416-599-2458, or you can email cilt@cilt.ca. And for Arch Disability Law Center, you can call 416-482-8255, or email general@arch.clcj.ca. So that's how you can get in contact with all of us. And I think this is the last slide before the Q&A, but we just wanted to include some information on how you can contact Wheel-Trans by phone if contacting Wheel-Trans online or booking your ride online is more difficult for you. So for Wheel-Trans reservations, you can call 416-393-4222. And that's to book a trip on the same day, or to confirm, reschedule, or modify a trip that you had already booked. For customer service, the phone number is 416-393-4111. And that phone number is for general questions, eligibility requirements for Wheel-Trans, and questions about Wheel-Trans policies. You can also use that phone number to set up your favorite addresses list, so places that you go frequently. And you can also get assistance with your Wheel-Trans service or give your feedback. And the priority line for Wheel-Trans is 416-393-4311. And that is the phone number you can call if your Wheel-Trans ride is over 30 minutes late, if you've missed your Wheel-Trans pickup and have received a no-show and require another ride, or to make a same-day cancellation.